All right, welcome to the Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries. I'm your host, John. Hope we had a good holiday through the month of December and New Year's. Now we're in January, which is Stalker Awareness Month. And that's what we're going to be focusing the show on this month. The definition of a stalker is a person who harasses or persecutes someone with unwanted and obsessive attention. And it leads me to the current situation with the Idaho murderer. And he was definitely a stalker. So that ties in with this month of Stalker Awareness Month and the Idaho murderer, who I believe was trying to be a copycat of a certain serial killer by the name of Theodore Bundy. And so these guys, Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez, they are the most dangerous stalkers ever known. So we're focusing today's show on a guy named Theodore Bundy. Okay, so we're going to tell you a little bit about his story as we're drawing him. Look at the eyes of this monster. That's all I have to do is, all I have to say is just look at those eyes. The story of Ted Bundy, the definition of heartless evil. Ted Bundy described himself as the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet. His crimes certainly prove that statement to be true. People say he's very handsome. I'm not really seeing it. All right, during the spring and summer of 1974, police in the Northwest were in a panic. Young women at colleges across Washington and Oregon were disappearing at an alarming rate, and law enforcement had few leads as to who was behind it. In just 6 months, 6 women had been abducted. Panic in the area reached a fever pitch when Janice Ann Ott and Denise Marie Manslund disappeared in the broad daylight from a crowded beach at Lake Samash State Park. But the boldest of the abductions also yielded the first real break in the case. On the day Ott and Manslund vanished, several other women remembered being approached by a man who had tried and failed to lure them to his car. They told the authorities about an attractive young man with his arm in a sling. His vehicle was a brown Volkswagen Beetle, and the name he gave was Ted. Okay, we're back. We had to pause it for a second. We don't edit here. Just had to pause it there. After releasing this description to the public, the police were contacted by 4 people who identified the same Seattle resident Theodore Bundy, Ted Bundy. These 4 people included Ted Bundy's ex-girlfriend, a close friend of his, one of his co-workers, and a psychology professor who had taught Bundy. He was college educated, going for law, which this Idaho murderer was also doing. Coincidence? I think not. And don't discard from all the brutal killings and the sickness and the lewdness of his crimes and his depravity that this guy was not a stalker. He stalked his victims, which were attractive young females, and he thought about it and he planned it. And these guys are the most dangerous stalkers. Serial killers are. And that's why we're highlighting them on Stalker Awareness Month. But they're a little bit of everything rolled in, but mostly they're stalkers. They're a little bit of every criminal rolled into one, the serial killers, but they're mostly dangerous stalkers. But the police were inundated with tips, and they dismissed Ted Bundy as a suspect, thinking it's unlikely that a clean-cut law student with no adult criminal record could be the perpetrator. He didn't fit the profile. These types of judgments benefited Ted Bundy many times throughout his murderous career as one of history's most infamous serial killers, which saw him take at least 30 victims across 7 states in the 1970s. Now that's just 30 that he admitted to, so I'm on the belief that there was many more. For a time he fooled everyone. The cops who didn't suspect him, the prison guards whose facilities he escaped from, the women he manipulated, the wife who married him after he was caught. But he was, as his final lawyer said, the very definition of heartless evil. As Ted Bundy himself once remarked, "I'm the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet." This is Ted Bundy's childhood we're going to next. Look at these eyes. These are the eyes of a serial killer. Cold, heartless, unforgiving. And if you got too close to these eyes, you probably met your maker. Not everybody did, though. There are survivors of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was born in Vermont, across the country from the Pacific Northwest communities he would one day terrorize. His mother was Eleanor Louise Cowell, and his father was unknown. His grandparents, ashamed of their daughter's out-of-wedlock pregnancy, raised him as their own child. For nearly all of his childhood, he believed his mother to be his sister. His grandfather would regularly beat both Ted and his mother, causing her to run away with her son to live with her cousins in Tacoma, Washington, when Bundy was just 5 years old. There, Eleanor met and married hospital cook Johnny Bundy, who formally adopted the young Ted Bundy and gave him his last name. Yeah, he had a lot of girlfriends and people that wrote him in jail when he was in jail. People that wanted to marry him. I'm not seeing it. I'm just not seeing the attraction of this guy. To me, if you look into his eyes, they look that of a monster. People said that his eyes went black when he was in one of his rages. Bundy disliked his stepfather and would later describe him to a girlfriend disparagingly, saying he wasn't very bright and didn't make much money. Little else is known for sure about the remainder of Bundy's childhood, as he gave conflicting accounts of his early years to different biographers. In general, he described an ordinary life punctuated with dark fantasies that affected him powerfully, though the degree to which he acted on them remains unclear. The reports of others similarly confused, though Bundy described himself as a loner who would stalk the seedy streets at night to spy on women. Many who remember Bundy from high school describe him as reasonably well known and well liked. Right there it says he's a stalker. He started out as a stalker and it became much more prolific at it. Now, there are some accounts that Bundy had admitted to when he was a child of like making like booby traps from like Vietnam and digging like a hole and putting them with, lining them up with like sharp sticks. They used to do this at Vietnam, and he waited for people to fall in it, and somebody actually did. There were reports saying that, and I don't know if they're true or not. Also, the reports say that he would line the other side of the bed and the double bed that he was sleeping in with butcher knives and all sorts of dangerous knives and put them under the sheets and let the person lay on top of them. Like I said, this is not this is just hearsay. These are different reports that I've heard about when looking into Bundy's childhood. That was when he was a child, he was doing that stuff. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but I don't know if it actually happened. Because he was probably showing signs of his sickness when he was a kid, no doubt. His college years and his first attack. Ted Bundy graduated from high school in '65, then enrolled in nearby University of Puget Sound. He spent 1 year there before transferring to the University of Washington to study Chinese. He dropped out briefly in '68, but quickly re-enrolled as a psychology major during his time out of school. He visited the East Coast. Where he likely first learned that the woman he believed to be his sister was actually his mother. Having some technical problems, that's all. We're all right. The music is going on and off here. For some, it's a mystery. It's an unsolved mystery. But we do have the music going right now. It may stop. I don't know why it's doing it. We don't edit here. Then back at the UW, Bundy started dating Elizabeth Klepner. Klepfer. Elizabeth Klepfer. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it right. A divorcee from Utah who worked as a secretary at the School of Medicine on campus. Later, Klepner was among the first to report Bundy to police as a suspect in the Pacific Northwest murders. Also among the 4 people who gave police Bundy's name was former Seattle police officer Ann Rule, who met Bundy at around the same time while they were both working at Seattle's Suicide Hotline Crisis Center. So you don't hear that every day of murderer and serial killer and a mass murderer volunteering his time at a suicide crisis hotline center. That was what was unique about Bundy. He didn't fit the MO of any killer at his during or even now this time period. He was in a class by himself. Rule would later write one of the definitive biographies of Ted Bundy, The Stranger Beside Me. In 1973, Bundy was accepted into the University of Puget Sound Law School, but after a few months he stopped attending classes. Then in January 1974, the disappearances began. And this wasn't long after that Rule, the lady that wrote that book, dumped him because of lack of ambition. I believe that was connected. Ted Bundy's first known attack was not an actual murder, but instead an assault on an 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a student and dancer at the University of Washington. She was a free spirit, people say. People counted of her. Bundy broke into her apartment and bludgeoned her unconscious with a metal rod from her bed frame before sexually assaulting her with the same object. His assault left her in a 10-day coma and with permanent disabilities. There's other reports saying that it was like some kind of gynecological tool. It wasn't a metal rod. There are conflicting reports on what he actually beat her with. Ted Bundy's first murders in Seattle. Ted Bundy's next victim and his first confirmed murder was Linda Ann Healy, another UW student. A month after his assault on Karen Sparks, Bundy broke into Healy's apartment in the early morning, knocked her unconscious, then clothed her body and carried her out in his car. She was never seen again, but part of her skull was discovered years later at one of the locations where Bundy dumped his bodies. Afterward, Bundy continued targeting female students in the area. He developed a technique approaching women while wearing a cast or appearing otherwise disabled and asking them to help him put something in his car. He would then bludgeon them unconscious before binding, raping, and killing them, dumping their bodies in a remote location in the woods. Bundy would often revisit these sites to have sex with their decaying corpses, for he was a necrophiliac. Bundy would decapitate his victims and keep their skulls in his apartment, sleeping beside his trophies. The ultimate possession, said Bundy, was taking of the life. Bundy once said, and then the physical possession of the remains. Murder is not just a crime of lust or violence, he explained. It becomes possession. They are a part of you. The victim becomes a part of you, and you, too, are forever one. And the grounds where you kill them or leave them become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them. This is how this guy thought. Not normal. Not the way you and I think. Over the next 5 months, Bundy abducted and murdered 5 female college students in the Pacific Northwest. Donna Gail Manson, Suzanne Elaine Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, Brenda Carol Ball, and Georgianne Hawkins. Responding to this rash of disappearances, police called for a major investigation and enlisted a number of different government agencies to help look for the missing girls. Don't think this guy wasn't a stalker. He stalked his girls. If he thought they were attractive, something told him that they would be an easy victim and they looked good, he was going to do it. He was ready and willing and able. One of these agencies was the Washington State Department of Emergency Services, where Bundy worked. There, Bundy met Carol Ann Boone, a twice-divorced mother of 2, whom he would date on and off for the years as the murders continued. Relocation to Utah and arrest for kidnapping. As the manhunt for the abductor continued, more witnesses produced descriptions that matched Ted Bundy in his car, just as some of his victims' bodies were being discovered in the woods. Bundy was accepted to law school in Utah and moved to Salt Lake City. While there, he continued to rape and murder young women, including a hitchhiker in Idaho and 4 teenage girls in Utah. Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, Laura Ain, Debbie Kent. Klepfner was aware that Bundy had relocated to the area, and on learning of the Utah murders, she called the police a second time to reaffirm her suspicion that Bundy was behind the killings. There was now a mounting pile of evidence pointing towards Ted Bundy, and when Washington investigators compiled their data, Bundy's name appeared at the top of the suspects' lists. Unaware of law enforcement's growing interest in him, Bundy continued killing, journeying to Colorado from his home in Utah to murder more young women there. Finally, in August 75, Bundy was pulled over while driving through a Salt Lake City suburb, and police discovered masks, handcuffs, blunt objects in the car. While this was not enough to arrest him, a police officer, realizing that Bundy was also a suspect in the earlier killings, put him under surveillance. The officers then found his Volkswagen Beetle, which he had since, and where they discovered hair matching 3 of his victims. With this evidence, they put him in a lineup where he was identified by one of the women who had attempted to abduct. He had attempted to abduct. He was convicted of kidnapping and assault and sent to prison while police attempted to build a murder case against him. And he escaped in Aspen. The reason why he escaped is just police dim-wittery, that's all. And then he got lucky. That's all. It doesn't mean he was intelligent. It means the cops that arrested him in Aspen were real dimwits. So then we fast forward to the Cowell mega murders at Florida State, which the Idaho murders are chillingly similar. Bundy's next escape took place just 6 months later, this time from a jail cell. After carefully studying a map of the prison, Bundy realized that his cell was directly beneath the living quarters of the prison's chief jailer. The 2 rooms were separated only by a crawl space. Bundy traded with another inmate to get a small hacksaw. And while his cellmates were exercising or showering, he worked away at the ceiling, scraping away layer by layer by layer of plaster. Very persistent devil, huh? The crawl space he made was small, very small. He began deliberately cutting back on meals in an effort to lose weight. He also planned ahead. Unlike last time when his escape had failed because he was without resources in the outside world, he stowed away a small pile of money smuggled to him by Carol Ann Boone, the woman who would later marry him in prison. When he was ready, Bundy finished the hole and crawled up into the chief jailer's room, finding it unoccupied. He swapped his prison jumpsuit for the man's civilian clothes and strolled out of the jail front doors. This time he didn't dawdle. He stole a car immediately and got out of town, making his way to Florida. It had been Bundy's intention to keep a low profile, but Florida life was presenting unexpected challenges. Unable to produce identification, he couldn't get a job. He was back to grifting and stealing for money. and the compulsion towards violence was simply too strong. On January 15th, 1978, 2 weeks after his escape, Bundy broke into Chi Omega sorority house on the Florida State University campus. Within the span of just 15 minutes, he sexually assaulted and killed Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, bludgeoning them with firewood and strangling them with stockings. He then assaulted Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, who both suffered horrific injuries, including broken jaws and missing teeth. He then broke into the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, who lived several blocks away, and beat her so badly she lost her hearing permanently. Still on the run, on February 8th, Bundy abducted a 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach from her middle school and murdered her, concealing her body on a pig farm. And then once again, his reckless driving caught the attention of the police when they realized that his plates belonged on a stolen car. They pulled him over and found the IDs of 3 dead women in his vehicle, linking him to the FSU crimes. "I wish you had killed me," Bundy told the arresting officer. Now, he definitely stalked those people at the Chi Omega house. That was a clear case of stalking. And that's why we're doing it. Because it is Stalking Awareness Month. You don't want to see a guy like this peering at you on the other side of binoculars. It's not something to joke about. It's not something romantic. That's a misconception that people joke around. It's nothing to joke around about. And then it gets into the trial and the execution of Ted Bundy. They put him to trial, and he represented himself because he was cocky and a narcissist. It ended up not doing him any good because they used a bite mark to convict him, which is now junk science, but back then it put him away, which thank God it did. And they did a lot of interviews with him, and he did like plea deals because they were going to execute him, no doubt about it. But he tried to prolong his life by doing plea deals. Like he said, look,